the dead, you failed to save them.
What is the answer to achieving true peace in anyone's lifetime? In the 20th century, the world made a giant leap towards peace and established several global outfits to ensure that the effects of World War II were never forgotten. And yet, we have wars breaking out across the globe less than a century into the United Nations' existence. Is mankind simply fated to exist in a barbaric loop where it keeps destroying itself and everything around it? Or is there a greater form of unification out there in the universe waiting for us to stumble across it? Well, that's the question that Isaac Asimov introduces in the final act of his Foundation series. And the answer he gives, at least vaguely, is this. Galaxia is his vision for a unified mankind, and we don't mean unified through treaties and alliances, we mean a single collective where all life exists as one, and where the scope of conflict is 0 to none. Spoiler warning, because in this video, we're going to be taking a look at Asimov's answer, and without further ado, let's get right into it. The test subject. Gaia, the living planet. Before we get into the topic of Galaxia, we need to talk about its predecessor, because while Galaxia's existence is sort of contingent on readers' choice, Gaia's existence is unquestionable. Isaac Asimov was a revolutionary writer whose works didn't just reflect the concerns of his time, they pushed the boundaries of human thought and intellect, addressing things that have become commonplace since. Robotics is a term that Asimov invented, for example, and today one of our biggest concerns is a planet-wide robot rebellion, or at least that's the case for the more paranoid minds of our time. Science fiction is often understood to be fictional science, but Asimov blended those two terms so seamlessly that he often blurred the line between what's real and what isn't, and that's where Gaia comes in. We've explored this topic in a separate video in quite a bit of detail, so we suggest you check that one out and come back to this one, but the gist of it is this. In order to ensure the peaceful coexistence of all life forms as we know them, what is better, retaining individuality or shedding it to the extent that all life is connected on a subconscious level? Gaia, the living planet, is Asimov's exploration of that quandary, and it's quite an interesting case study in collective consciousness if you ask us. To put it simply, Asimov's Gaia is a living example of the theory proposed by English chemist James Lovelock in the 70s. Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis is an ambitious exploration of the question, is life everywhere around us? As humans, we have a tendency to humanize everything, even inanimate objects like rocks and rivers. This mostly stems from our desire to quote-unquote connect with our environment, but how can we do that when something doesn't even have life? Well, they don't have a true personality to speak of. Inanimate objects do contribute to the overall phenomenon known as life, and so Lovelock asked, is it just living beings who can participate in the act of living, or do things that have no such concept also contribute to life? We know for a fact that the development of living organisms on Earth is what has kept things stable for eons beyond count. If the first microorganisms didn't come into existence, the oxygen in our atmosphere would have probably reached the 25% level that makes it combustible. It's also thanks to living beings that the oxygen and carbon dioxide levels of Earth's atmosphere have remained comparatively stable for several millennia. But those microorganisms wouldn't have developed if the Earth didn't reconstitute itself after being blown to pieces by cosmic events. It was only after that primordial sea of heat and lava cooled down, thanks to spatial temperature, that life was made possible. So, is it really true that only living things experience and lead to the development and sustenance of life? Lovelock claims it isn't, and the Gaia hypothesis is his explanation for the same. According to this hypothesis, the people of Earth and the planet itself cooperate in a self-regulatory model that ensures life can never be wiped out. He uses examples like ocean salinity and atmospheric stability to base his argument off of, and in a way, it does make some sense. How is it possible that the world's oceans never increase in salinity, despite the fact that more and more feeding systems are being unleashed upon them year after year? Certainly, life has an effect on it, but it also feels like Earth itself is a major factor in the continued stability of such things. While there's no major evidence for the latter, the former has been confirmed more than adequately for the field of Earth sciences to emerge. And though the Gaia hypothesis has never been accepted, it has been acknowledged for its role in the development of scientific fields that more accurately explain the intermingling factors that make life possible. So while it might not be true that Earth itself is alive, like the Greek mother deity after whom Lovelock's hypothesis is named, it's true that collective and connective existence of organic and inorganic elements is what makes life possible. Asimov extends this idea to the concept of consciousness with his Gaia, which is where the meat of the Foundation series' ultimate message resides. So now that we've given you a breakdown of what creates the basis for Gaia the living planet, let's now talk about the problem it seeks to solve, which is what will ultimately lead us to our destination, Galaxia. Collectivism versus individuality, the real question posed by Asimov. If you've made it this far and are willing to keep going, then we'd suggest you put on your scuba suits because this is going to be a deep dive into one of the most interesting topics related to the human mind. The collectivism versus individuality debate with regards to consciousness spans across several scientific fields and schools of thought, including philosophy, psychology, sociology, neuroscience, and even evolutionary biology. The tension between collectivism and individuality is one of the oldest questions regarding mankind's existence, re-emerging across different eras and disciplines in similar forms. It asks a core question: is human consciousness fundamentally shaped by our social existence as part of a collective, or is it an autonomous, self-contained phenomenon rooted in individual agency? And this isn't merely an abstract discussion. The answer influences everything, from our political systems and cultural norms to our ethical frameworks and personal identity. So, to examine it in the context of human consciousness, as Asimov employs it, we must first understand what each of these terms means and what has been said about their influence on the experience known as life. Collectivism holds the view that the individual is inseparable from the group. This argument comes from the idea that humans are social creatures by default and that consciousness develops and operates within a social and cultural matrix. It states that personal identity is fundamentally tied to collective identity, which is in direct opposition to the very concept of individuality. We all know what individuality is, don't we? After all, we're individuals. We all believe that our experience of life is primarily an individual phenomenon, that our private experiences, which are highly subjective, and our intrinsic autonomy, which can be perceived as the concept of personal will, are our own, even if they're influenced by social factors. There are several ideas and theories that explore this conflict in detail, so let's start off with the side of collectivism first. Collectivism forms its base argument on the idea that social interactions are what construct our personal identity, which makes them the primary driver of consciousness. Let's take language, for example. Language is a collective invention because no one sat in a cave one day, came up with the alphabet, and started preaching it to the world. It was developed through constant social interactions to the point that it's believed that thought is shaped by language. Cultures with multiple words for snow perceive and categorize snow differently from those with only one term. This can be particularly noticed in the Japanese language, which has completely different words for snow and snowing. So, if the structure of a language affects its speaker's cognition and worldview, then consciousness must be inherently social. And this is exactly what the linguists Sapir and Worf proposed with their hypothesis of linguistic relativity. Now, let's think about our own lives for a minute. Do you remember how you first learned mathematics? Was it in a class full of kids that were just as young as you? And none of you even knew what maths were in the beginning, right? It was only through that collective experience of being in a classroom that we were able to learn that numbers can make us hate life as well. Problem-solving skills are first learned in collaboration with others, and then later become independent cognitive tools, something we've all experienced as people. Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky used this fact to argue that higher mental functions develop first on a social level before being internalized individually, which must mean that the human collective is what shapes the human individual. These two ideas are summed up rather neatly by Durkheim's revolutionary concept of collective consciousness, which states that individual consciousness emerges within and is constrained by a shared set of beliefs, ideas, and moral attitudes that unify members within a single framework. We as a species know that touching fire will burn us, or that criminal acts are just that, no matter what kind of personal views we use to justify them. It's that collective consciousness that allows our individual one to develop. Therefore, consciousness itself is a group thing, not an individual thing. Navigating a ship involves the use of shared mental models among crew members, not just individual mental processes, because if everyone doesn't know where they need to be when and with what, requiring someone to constantly bark orders at them, then the ship simply doesn't function. Our self-identity is drawn from what people perceive us as and what roles we fulfill in society, and perhaps the best examples of collectivism come from ancient Sparta and Confucian China. The movie 300 might have been a massive rewriting of real history, but it got one thing right about Spartan society. It got their loyalty to the idea of Sparta more than their individual selves bang on. In ancient Sparta, individual identity was subsumed into state training and Spartan values, with all individuals' consciousness being geared towards communal military excellence. This is Sparta is an excellent piece of dialogue with exceptional delivery from Gerard Butler, but it's also a motto that was hammered into the heads of ancient Spartans, who did everything they did for Sparta's sake. Confucian China was similar, placing emphasis on filial piety, social hierarchy, and collective harmony as being central to the formation of personal identity. Now that we've gotten neck deep into the swamp of collectivism, let's try pulling ourselves out of it with the rope of individualism. The primary argument for consciousness being individualistic in nature is the fact that even in isolation, it continues to develop, and there are several situations in life where individual reasoning trumps established social norms and ethics. You guys might be familiar with that one episode from The Good Place where Chidi is forced to pick between killing either a group of strangers or a lone friend as he operates a trolley. That episode is based on Green's trolley problem, an experiment in moral psychology that tests people's ability to override social conditioning and make decisions based on personal moral reasoning. Social convention would state that saving 10 people is better than 1 because of the overall number of lives saved. But is that really possible when the one person who ends up dying is someone you've known for several years and is an integral part of your life? What if those 10 people were ordinary citizens and that lone person was the president of the United States? How does one quantify the value of life based on established social norms in that case, seeing as the president might be an individual but is linked to the lives of millions of people? Individual morality is the deciding factor in such a case because some might choose to go with the collectivist viewpoint, but others might make the quote-unquote harder choice. And that is the core reason individualism is looked at as the reason behind consciousness by its proponents. In fact, the self-determination theory states that both psychological well-being and intrinsic motivation are tied to autonomy, which simply put is the sense of being the originator of one's own actions. French philosopher René Descartes' famous quote, "I think therefore I am," places the self at the center of the concept of existence as its foundation, because even in complete isolation from the social world, the thinking self exists and is aware. How many times have we heard accounts of prisoners in solitary confinement or monks in extremely isolated meditative environments demonstrating that consciousness persists, evolves, and can remain rich even without social interaction? Sure, the psychological cost of such an existence isn't negligible, and isolated individuals often find it difficult to interact with the social world, but that doesn't erase their own consciousness or its continued existence. Phenomenologists study consciousness as it's experienced, emphasizing first-person subjectivity, stating that while social interactions influence perception, the act of experiencing is individual. And English philosopher John Stuart Mill took this idea even further when he argued that the progress of society depends on individual freedom to think, act, and develop without being swallowed by conformity. There is a certain amount of biological evidence supporting this idea as well. Well, it is true that much of our learning takes place thanks to mirror neurons that fire when we're learning something and observing something with the intent to learn it. It's also true that the brain's default mode network, which is active during introspection and self-referential thought, indicates an intrinsic self-processing mechanism that operates independently of immediate social stimuli. Humans survived and evolved in small cooperative groups, often with a single leader in charge of said groups. Natural selection also favors individual decision-making, focusing on a single organism's capacity for innovation and adaptability, as opposed to viewing the human species through a collective lens. Early humans who could think independently often pioneered survival strategies and theories like inclusive fitness and reciprocal altruism, suggesting consciousness evolved partly as a tool for managing complex social interactions like coordinating hunts, dividing resources, and enforcing norms. Anthropologist Joseph Heinrich believed that while culture is collective, innovation often begins with a single creative mind before spreading. And this is quite true if you just consider the examples we're about to present to you. The Renaissance era and the Romanticism movement both stemmed from an intense desire to display personal and individualistic art styles and methods of expression, but the ultimate example of a single person leading to groundbreaking innovation would have to be Einstein's theory of relativity. Einstein's theory of relativity built upon the works of his predecessors like Isaac Newton, but his individual thoughts and experiments developed the science of physics by leaps and bounds to the point that it completely recontextualized our understanding of the universe on a fundamental level. So you can now understand why collectivism versus individualism is such a big debate, right? Separating the I from we is one of the biggest questions humans have struggled with for centuries, because where do those things begin and where do they end? Well, Asimov's approach blends both of these things based on a third school of thought, following certain theories that reject the strict dichotomy in favor of a unified solution. Ubuntu philosophy, which originates from the Bantu people of Africa, states that I am because we are. Ubuntu philosophy integrates individuality and collectivity, arguing that personal identity is co-created through relationships, arguing that the collective and the individual are interdependent. Aristotle often called humans zoon politikon, which basically meant that we're social political animals, but he also stressed that things like virtue and personal flourishing are ultimately individual achievements within a community. In contexts like group meditation, romantic bonding, or religious rituals, the boundary between self and others can blur, which suggests that consciousness is fluid and can adopt more collective configurations. And this is the idea that Asimov uses to answer the question posed by the collectivism versus versus individuality debate. So now that we have all the philosophical, ethical, and scientific considerations out in the open, let's now take a look at Galaxia, which operates off a Ubuntu-esque philosophy. The actual product, Galaxia's existence as a savior of mankind. For the final section of this video, let's go back to the beginning for a few minutes because all of our collectivism and individualism talk won't make sense otherwise. In Asimov's foundation, Gaia is a collective organism that preserves a certain degree of individuality in all of its sentient life forms, which is similar to Lovelock's hypothesis but different from it at the same time. It was created over several centuries by R. Daniil Olivaw, aka Edo Demerzel, for one purpose: to make humans simpler to understand and therefore guide. Unlike Apple TV's Foundation series, where Demerzel has been bound to serving the Galactic Empire, in Asimov's work, the robot's involvement with Cleon I was a one-off occurrence. It decides to join his administration because it felt that it would give Daniil the best stage for changing humanity's perspective, but the robot realized pretty quickly that this was a gamble with negligible chances for success. Individuality was identified as the biggest obstacle when it came to achieving universal peace, because as long as one rebellious and power-hungry element existed in the world, it could never be truly unified and harmony wouldn't be achieved. So, as Daniil nurtured Harry Seldon's development of psychohistory and ultimately the two foundations, it also created a separate model for unification in Gaia. Daniil secretly offloaded humans to this planet generation after generation, evading detection from all, and when its population reached a certain point, it bestowed them with a certain ability. That ability was the mentalic power to read and influence the thoughts of another sentient being, which was born from one of Asimov's original ideas called cerebroanalysis. Cerebroanalysis is a concept that uses electromagnetic radiation as its basis for quote-unquote telepathy. All things in the universe, whether organic or inorganic, emit a certain amount of electromagnetic waves. Cerebroanalysis is the precise perception, dissection, and manipulation of these waves, especially those being emitted by sentient beings, which enables one entity to read and ultimately alter the thoughts and memories of another. By bestowing the population of Gaia with this ability en masse, Daniil created the stage for a collective existence, because there was no way that all those awakened minds and their brainwaves wouldn't start interacting with and gradually overlapping one another. If that sounds complicated, let's explain it in terms that might be a little bit more relatable for all of us. Think about the main landing page of any website. This page forms the pillar of the site, and it's possible for us to navigate to all parts of the site from the main landing page. But if we click a certain link on it, we'll be transported to an individual web page that might be addressing an individual topic, and that page itself might have links that keep branching off into standalone topics over and over, creating a complex web of information dissemination. All those web pages make sense by themselves and stand as individual sources of information, but it's only through the collection of web pages that the website as a whole makes sense. In the context of Foundation, Gaia is the website and its inhabitants are the web pages, with each of them containing a certain amount of information that can be shared throughout the collective. After awakening the minds of its population, Daniil sat back and observed as that collective awareness was eventually extended to every single element that composed the planet itself until its trees, streams, and even individual grains of sand were capable of receiving and retaining information. Once that happened, Gaia became a true collective consciousness because while its individual organic and inorganic elements might have stored a certain level of information based on the size and complexity of the brains present within them, all elements had access to all information throughout the collective. This enabled the inhabitants of Gaia to perform deeds that could be considered miraculous, like updating the collective's databank from light years away through hyperspace information dissemination. All residents of Gaia are aware of their citizens' living status and current location at all times, and in fact, they don't refer to themselves solely as individuals. Gaia is explored most in the novels Foundation's Edge and Foundation in Earth, where we meet a Gaian character. This character's name is Blissinobiarella, or Bliss for short, and she has a rather unique sense of identity. When she refers to herself as an individual, she addresses herself with the word I. When she's talking about Gaia in general, she uses the words we and Gaia, which reflect her collective identity as part of that superorganism. In the two novels we just mentioned, the protagonists set out on a journey to find Earth, which they believe holds the answers to the continued and peaceful coexistence of the trillions that compose the Galactic Empire and the Foundation Federation. But instead, what they find is Daniil's experiment, which aims to achieve those same things. They also end up meeting Daniil himself, himself who reveals its ultimate goal to them, creating an entire galaxy that's just like Gaia. Because Gaia is connected through its complex system of consciousness, it's able to obtain information, process it, and formulate a collective response at speeds that exceed that of the human mind. And by breeding concepts such as valuing freedom and life itself into Gaians, Daniil hoped that the ill feelings that gave rise to division within the human population would be erased. His test subject wasn't perfect by any means. Gaia is also the planet where the mule was born, and the mule is one of the worst people to ever emerge in the Galactic Empire. But it was the best answer Daniil could think of when it came to the zero law of robotics. This law, which was developed independently of the three laws, states that a robot can never harm the human species through its actions or its inaction, but every step Daniil has taken in the series has been guided by it. But ultimately, that's a contradiction that's too complex for Daniil's positronic brain to answer definitively, for there are instances where doing something has led to massive disasters, and there are instances where doing nothing has made things worse. The universe's most complex robotic being required external verification for whether the answer it came up with in Gaia was right or wrong, and that's the driving factor behind the storylines of Foundation's Edge as well as Foundation and Earth. The protagonists of those novels meet Daniil and Bliss and observe the former's reasoning through the actions of the latter. One of the protagonists, Golan Trevis, has the unique ability to make the right call at a certain point in time, even if the logic that motivates it might not seem completely logical. And what Trevis decides after interacting with Bliss is that Gaia is the right answer, not the Galactic Empire or a world controlled by either Foundation. Trevis himself doesn't have a clue as to why he feels that way, because he knows that by choosing a collective existence, he'll be negating a core human instinct, which is the concept of free will. Individualists defend and uphold free will as the ultimate expression of consciousness, because as humans, the right to choose our actions and ultimately the path our lives take is sacred to us. But Trevis recognizes through meeting Bliss that Gaia, and by extension Galaxia, will be a system where both the individual and the collective will coexist through interconnectivity. Bliss might be part of a hive mind-like organism that has independent will of its own, like Durkheim's collective consciousness suggests, but Trevis personally witnesses Bliss's individuality when he sees her fall in love with his companion, Janov Peloro. At first, Trevis finds Bliss to be kind of abnormal. In fact, he thinks she's a lot like a robot, which makes sense given her entire planet was founded by a robot. But as time passes and her relationship with Peloro becomes personal, Trevis comes to realize the true potential of Gaia, and by extension Galaxia. If in a collective consciousness there are individuals like Bliss still present, then it's possible for a single individual to eventually change its mind and cause a chain reaction throughout the collective. Or it's also possible that the change remains with the individual, like it did with the mule. Based on the logic Daniil gives Trevis's party, it's clear that despite manipulating humans for eons, it only wanted what was best for them, and it believed that Galaxia was the ultimate answer to the deepest of human conflicts. In a galaxy where every kernel of stardust is connected, it should technically become impossible for rebellious elements to develop in isolation, which would bring in the possibility for true peace and harmony. And by turning organic and inorganic elements into web pages that can be explored by accessing the website called Collective Consciousness, both individuality and collectivism can be maintained. Asimov's Foundation series doesn't give us a definite answer to the debate we discussed extensively a few minutes ago, because doing so would be presumptive. While it is decided in the final Foundation novels that Galaxia should be created, it's also decided that Trevis would retain the right to change his mind in the future and stop this from happening, because that is the kind of system he was about to enter. Daniil's brain, which becomes too complex for his inorganic body to handle, merges with a biological mind to allow him to continue overseeing Galaxia's development, because he wants humans to defend themselves from their own kind and also from other sentient life forms that remain undiscovered. There aren't many aliens in the Foundation series, but Asimov never dismisses the possibility of their existence, and his characters believe a galactic hive mind-like structure would be the ultimate defense against hostile aliens. They had experienced the utter chaos and destruction of the Galactic Empire, even though it remained restricted to one galaxy, because the vast distances of space itself were conducive to rebellious and insubordinate elements taking root. But if each planet, each asteroid, each star and their systems, as well as the living and non-living components that comprise the concept of life, were to unite, then finally true peace could be achieved, at least theoretically. Galaxia was Asimov's ultimate vision for the future of mankind, where all people are part of a true collective as they remain mostly themselves. And while the Apple TV show might not take things to this level, considering the level of complexity involved, for the sake of thought-inspiring sci-fi storytelling, we really hope they do. Marvelous verdict! That's it for this one, folks. We know this video went to more than a few weird places, but that's the thing about Asimov's writing. He wasn't afraid to explore topics and angles that people might not agree with, and ironically enough, that's as individualistic as one can get. Still, we can't wait to hear your thoughts on this topic and Galaxia as a concept, so fire away in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Foundation content. We like making it, so show us how much you like listening to it. We'll see you guys real soon, so stay safe out there, but remember, if you start hearing things from a rock, you're not going crazy, you're just becoming a part of a greater whole that you can't see quite yet.